Imagine this. You're young, you're brilliant, an intelligence analyst. You've got like almost 1 million top secret government files. And you decide, okay, I'm going to show these to the world.
Yeah.
Now, picture the reaction. An immediate, intense, global manhunt kicks off. That's the incredible story we're really getting into today. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack Edward Snowden, not just what he leaked, but the why, the how. And this absolutely wild international case that happened right after. We're using the sources you've shared, looking at it like a real-life spy movie.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating, I think, is how fast it all blew up. It went from one person leaking documents to this huge, complex geopolitical mess. It really pushed the buttons on national security versus, well, personal freedom and how international law even works in these situations. We'll dig into the specifics, what made this case just so explosive.
Okay, let's break it down. Who is Edward Snowden? Or who was he then? He was 29. An NSA analyst working for Booz, Allen Hamilton, those big contractors.
Yeah.
And he wasn't new to this world. He had had this really impressive career, getting top-level access by, age 27. Came from a military family, too. Service going way back.
Right. And his reason, the motivation he gave was this sort of growing realization, as he put it, that the U.S. government was drifting away from the rule of law. Crucially, though, it wasn't about exposing specific spy operations. He wanted to show the method, the system. He had that famous line, right? Not the bucket of water, but the plumbing, how information was being collected. Things like PRISM, collecting internet data, phone records. Just the sheer scale of it was something most people couldn't imagine.
And the stud he had, nearly 1 million documents, top secret. Just carrying those out, he knew he was looking at serious prison time. Decades, maybe. The risk was enormous. Which makes his next move even more incredible. He picks Hong Kong for a secret meeting with journalists from The Guardian. These journalists fly halfway around the world, basically into the dark. They even thought, maybe it's a setup, a trap, full of hazards. Snowden himself said he'd crossed the Rubicon, expected handcuffs.
You can just feel the tension, can't you? In that hotel room, the security measures he took were extreme. Piling pillows against the door, to block sound.
Yeah.
Using that big red hood over his head and the computer for passwords, worried about hidden cameras, everything.
Wow.
That level of paranoia, it really speaks volumes about the perceived threat, doesn't it? And, well, the nature of the information itself, he obviously thought they'd stop at nothing.
And that little detail about how they first met, the identification method, he held up a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, quite ingenious, wasn't it? A bit of spycraft in the middle of all this real-world danger.
So, The Guardian publishes. But they don't name him at first.
No, they kept his identity secret initially, but you have to figure the NSA. They probably had a very good idea who it was almost instantly, and they'd start throwing everything they had, all the government's tools, into finding him. They weren't just going to sit back.
Oh, definitely not. The U.S. government's reaction was immediate and fierce, calling him a coward, a traitor. You heard the phrase, greatest loss of secrets in our nation's history. They were absolutely energized, as one source put it, to get the documents back. Snowden himself even worried they might try to, kill him.
The stakes were incredibly high, life and death, potentially.
So the moment he goes public, reveals his identity, the chase is truly on. FBI, other agencies, like something out of Catch Me If You Can. Yeah. And they got a huge clue almost immediately from that video interview on the Guardian site.
Right, the view from his hotel window, those 2 bridge pylons, the tri-bridge, geolocation bang, they knew where he was.
That must have sent a chill down his spine.
Absolutely. And legally, things moved fast, too. The U.S. unsealed an indictment, Espionage Act charges, theft of government property. The Espionage Act, that's serious stuff, potentially even the death penalty, depending on how it's applied. It sent a message, and people immediately thought of Chelsea Manning, the treatment she faced, raised grave concerns.
So he's cornered, basically, facing these massive charges. What does he do? He reaches out to WikiLeaks, looking for someone, a group, who could maybe stand up to the NSA's resources.
And WikiLeaks stepped in. Sarah Harrison, the journalist, led Operation Asylum. They famously said they were the only publisher actually willing to help the source physically escape.
That's a big claim.
It is. Meanwhile, Hong Kong's government is in a really tough spot.
Yeah, I bet. Protesters in the streets calling Snowden a hero.
Right. But the government sees him as a hot potato. They don't want to anger Beijing or their own people, and they've got this White House task force breathing down their necks. U.S. officials are constantly calling their counterparts in Hong Kong, absolutely sure they know where he is. Pressure mounting.
So WikiLeaks comes up with this escape plan. Sounds complicated.
Very. They bought over a dozen plane tickets in Snowden's name, different destinations.
Decoys.
Exactly. Trying to split U.S. surveillance, confuse them. There's even a decoy flight booked to India on his own credit card for 2 days after he was actually planning to leave.
And the U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder actually calls Hong Kong directly,
Yeah.
stressing they need to arrest him, NW.
Yeah, the pressure was immense. But then came this mistake, a really crucial one by the U.S.
What happened?
In the extradition request paperwork, they got his middle name wrong, put Edward James Snowden instead of Edward Joseph Snowden.
No way.
Yes. And the Hong Kong authorities, being very strict about legal details, used that tiny error as an excuse. Said they needed a few days to clarify.
And that delay.
That was the window. That was everything. It gave him just enough time to get out. A tiny clerical error with massive consequences.
So the actual escape
Yeah.
must have been nerve-wracking at the airport.
Oh, totally. They were running late, apparently some printer issue with the tickets. Then at passport control, the computer makes a weird noise.
Oh, man.
And the flight was delayed 20 minutes, but somehow they made it onto the plane.
Wow. The relief must have been unbelievable.
Huge. And apparently, once they're safely out of Hong Kong airspace, his first question to Sarah Harrison was basically, why? Why risk all this for me? It shows the human element, the personal cost.
So they land in Moscow. Snowden thinks he's just transiting, right?
Right.
Believes his U.S. passport is still valid.
Yeah, that was the plan. But here's the twist. The U.S. government cancels his passport while he's in the air after he left Hong Kong.
So he lands in Moscow, and he's stuck.
Exactly. Frozen. Can't leave the airport transit zone. What was meant to be a quick stopover turns into, well, limbo.
Did the U.S. have a backup plan if he hadn't gotten stuck there?
It seems so. Reports suggest a former CIA rendition plane was actually on standby in Virginia, ready to fly him back.
Wow. Rendition. And they even tried to get his dad involved.
Yeah, the FBI contacted his father, tried to convince him to fly to Moscow, supposedly to check on Snowden's health. Snowden called it a wacky strategy, later clearly an attempt to lure him onto a U.S.-controlled plane.
Just incredible lengths. And meanwhile, at the Moscow airport itself, chaos.
Total chaos. Julian Assange, remember, he's holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, tries to arrange diplomatic protection. An Ecuadorian diplomat goes to the airport.
Right.
But there are hundreds of journalists there. Absolute pandemonium. The diplomat literally couldn't find Snowden in the crowd.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So passport canceled, can't get on the flight to Cuba, which was his next intended stop.
Nope. So he and Sarah Harrison end up stuck in the transit zone, in a room described as having no window or shower, for weeks, which turned into months.
Just stuck there.
Oh,
For a
yeah,
month
wow.
initially, right? In those conditions.
Imagine that. And during that time, reports say the Russians, the FSB, offered him a deal. Leave the airport, but you have to cooperate, work with us.
Did he take it?
He refused. And initially, President Putin wasn't keen on letting him into Russia proper either. So he was really trapped in this bizarre international no man's land.
So what are his options? He's stuck in this transit zone.
Well, he tries to leverage public opinion. He applies for asylum in, 21 different Western European countries, hoping someone will step up, maybe feeling pressure from their own citizens who saw him as a hero.
And the U.S. reaction to that?
Predictable, I guess. The State Department apparently worked the phones like crazy, calling every government office in Europe, basically saying, don't even think about giving this guy asylum. Sources called it bullying or arm twisting.
Yeah.
And the result? Most European governments just stayed silent, didn't want to cross the U.S.
So doors slamming shut in Europe, but then Latin America.
Yeah, a glimmer of hope. Venezuela and Bolivia both offered him asylum. The challenge, though, was how to physically get him there from Moscow.
Right. Across half the world, with the U.S. watching every move.
So WikiLeaks starts brainstorming again. Private jets, commercial flights. Too risky. They thought maybe a presidential jet, with its diplomatic status, might be the safest bet. And suspicion fell on Bolivian President Evo Morales. He was in Moscow for a summit. The U.S. seemed to think he might try to smuggle Snowden out on his plane.
Which led to that absolutely crazy incident.
Unprecedented, really. Morales' presidential plane takes off from Moscow, and suddenly, France and Portugal deny it airspace, reportedly under U.S. pressure.
Forcing it to land where? Austria.
In Vienna, Austria. And they actually searched the plane for Snowden. He wasn't on it, of course.
Searching a head of state's plane. That caused outrage, right?
Huge outrage, especially across Latin America, seen as a massive violation of sovereignty, of international law.
But was it just U.S. paranoia about Morales? Or was there more to it?
Well, WikiLeaks later revealed they'd been deliberately laying false trails, making calls on open lines hinting Snowden might be on that plane. It was designed to distract U.S. surveillance, make them focus resources on the Morales flight. An incredibly clever gamble, as some called it.
but it backfired on the U.S.
Massively. It was a huge public relations disaster for them, made them look like bullies, reinforced that Snowden as victim image. People started asking, are these really the good guys?
So after all that drama, all the failed asylum bids in Europe, the plane incident, what finally happens?
Weeks turn into over a month stuck in the airport. Then finally, Russia blinks. Their Federal Migration Service grants Snowden temporary asylum, just for 1 year initially.
He can finally leave the airport.
Yes.
Ah.
He described stepping outside, seeing the sky, birds, traffic, feeling almost tearful. Just simple things after being confined for so long. A powerful moment.
But Russia granting asylum, that must have tanked relations with the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. Dropped them to the lowest level in years.
Yeah.
The U.S. was officially extremely disappointed. They were adamant Mr. Snowden is not a whistleblower.
Yeah.
And that fundamental disagreement, that lack of cooperation between the U.S. and Russia over Snowden, it really cast a long shadow. Some say it still haunts the world today, highlighting those deep divisions.
And even now, years later, within the U.S. intelligence community, is there any softening?
Not really. Based on reports, you've got this huge community, maybe 100,000 strong, many of whom are absolutely against any kind of amnesty or plea deal for Snowden. They feel it would betray everyone who does follow the rules, who protects national security. The feeling is still very much he needs to be caught, brought back, and face trial.
So the risk for him remains.
Definitely. As one source put it, if you embarrass a major power, you're probably never going to be truly safe. There's always that desire to send messages, set examples, don't mess with us. It's a stark reality for whistleblowers or leakers.
Wow, what a story. We've covered so much ground today, from that tense Hong Kong hotel room through the chase, the months in the Moscow airport. It's just an incredible deep dive into information, government power, secrets, and the sheer personal cost, isn't it? The price one person paid for defying that power.
Absolutely. And the whole thing, the leaks themselves, the pursuit, the diplomatic fallout, it just keeps generating debate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really forces you to confront that line between keeping a nation secure and the public's right to know what's being done in their name. What does this whole saga truly tell us about power in our modern, connected world?
So the final thought for you, listening, what does it all mean? In this digital age, with surveillance capabilities growing, where does our responsibility as individuals lie, especially when we see something we think is government overreach? And what are the real ripple effects of actions like Snowden's on all of us, on society, on privacy, on that balance between the citizen and the state? Definitely something to think about